innovative architecture on Goa, and more importantly, for his strong stands on citizen issues affecting the state. Dean, in this series, we are looking at how Goa's runaway politics is affecting different spheres of life. Could you tell us how it affects architecture in that sense, as a profession?
Yeah, I think architecture, and of course it's related, the whole building development thing is really a conduit for a lot of the funding that goes into the political system. And you see a lot of what happens in terms of the way people invest. They use land banks as vote banks, and it's become a commodity which is also easy to hide a lot of illegal wealth, because you can't tell what is the true value of land. When you have money in a bank account or something, you know what the true value is. In land, you can say I bought it for so much, and this is what the value is. And that's why you see a lot of declaration, on these ministers and say they have so much of land or flat, and they undervalue it because its value is dependent on a number of factors which they can try and manipulate. So, and also land is something which you can change in its value in a matter of seconds. I mean, we've seen in, say, the regional plan, whatever land is in settlement area is worth much more than the land which is non-settlement area. So people are now trying to the 16B and through the ODPs is just with a single paintbrush, change the value of land, 10 to 100 times it, just by changing the zone.
By just a stroke of one pen or change of some zoning or something small.
And therefore, you've seen it happen in Delhi, for example, in the Gurgaon area, and farmers' fields are converted into buildable land, and the value goes up, tremendously. So, and all this is the root of black money, corruption, political power, which is come. So land is this commodity which can be easily misused. And along with land, of course, comes development, buildings, which again are a part of the whole game, of power, of the so-called investments that are coming into the state. And Goa was seeing a surge of investment that's coming in, especially in the recent months, because of the pandemic, people know that they can work anywhere in Goa, anywhere in India or the world, and Goa is a really nice space for them to be rather than a city. So it's under tremendous pressure of development, and politicians know this, so they can actually use this thing to get money through licensing, get money through change of land use, through building contracts, and so it's really something which needs to be monitored very carefully, and people to understand what development is all about. So when we prepared the regional plan, the first thing we said, whenever you have development, say you have settlement area, and which you call your infrastructure. But that infrastructure of settlement area, whether it's residential, industrial, or whatever, roads, networks, needs for its own life, if you say, green areas. It needs fields, it needs orchard areas, it needs water bodies. And generally, you say that these green infrastructural areas should be at least 5 times bigger than the settlement areas. If you are to get your food, your water, your energy, process your waste in these green areas, it needs to be much more. So people think that if you convert the whole state into like a settlement area, you solve the problem, but actually you're creating a much bigger problem because you have no natural resources to actually tap. So it's very essential that we keep these ratios, and of course it depends on the fertility of the land, on say the water harvesting capability of the land, how much area. So in a dry arid region, you'll probably need much more land to support settlement area, but in a more fertile area like Goa or something, you probably need a little less natural areas. But we also have to keep things for nature. It's land is not meant for just human beings, it's meant for the rest of nature as well. So we have to bear that in mind. We always think of land as the top predator, it's only for us, but we're a species that if we're going through this whole Anthropocene stage, we may not be there in the next 100 years, but so we have to really be careful in the way we handle development, understand development, and as far as the political scenario is make sure that it's not misused.
Dean, you came back to Goa in 1983 around that time, when and of course added a lot of value to the state not only to the aesthetic value in terms of the architecture you created, but in terms of the stands you've taken, the very ethical, and sometimes at the cost of of your career and things like that. At that stage, people were still leaving Goa. At what stage did this real estate thing heat up? In which year would you say was the turning point, or more or less when?
I think about 30 years ago is really, you know, in the early 90s is really when things started, changing. Where you could see people moving. At that time, it was just areas from Bombay, Delhi, uh, parts of India who would come down to Goa. It's a great place to retire, and they would find a place. So it wasn't that sort of pressure of this is the hot spot and this is really the playground of the rest of India that made it so popular. It's just an alternative, just like in Florida, it's like the retirement area of America. So Goa became this retirement area for the rest of India as well. So it was Goa could take that sort of pressure. It was it was fine, and the thing is, Goa's natural resources are really rich. I mean, we have capability of actually possibly even supporting double the amount of people that the population is at the moment. Say we're about 15 lakhs, maybe we can actually go up to 30 lakhs, but it needs proper planning. We need development in only very areas which are not eco-sensitive, areas which can be developed without destruction of natural resources. But that's not happening. It's a very random, unscientific development that's taking place at the moment. And it's also dependent on infrastructure. When you look at infrastructure, can the infrastructure support it? So are the roads wide enough? Is there enough water supply? Is there enough power supply? Are sewage systems in place? Are solid waste management systems in place? And also the social infrastructure. Are there enough schools? Are there enough hospitals? Or marketplace, whatever? That also needs to be in place. We're tending to put the cart before the horse. We talk about building homes and offices, and there is no infrastructure to support it. And therefore, there's tremendous pressure on the local population. So we need to understand that infrastructure must come first before we get development, because otherwise it really compromises the lives of the existing population in the state. And therefore, even when we're looking at the tourism model, whatever we do for tourism should firstly benefit the local team. Does it benefit? Are there better stands? Are there better marketplaces? Then automatically tourism will be something which does not destroy the local sort of infrastructure or culture of the place. It's tourism becomes parasitic otherwise on the infrastructure of the state, and the local population suffers as a result of it. And therefore there's a resentment to tourism after a certain time, and we can already see that happening in a lot of places in Goa, where there is resentment to develop. Even though it is money, it's pinching people.
Yeah, Dean, you're putting it so succinctly that I cannot but avoid interrupting what you're saying. But let me be very unfair to you and ask you to explain in 2 minutes or whatever time you want to take the regional plan and what happened and what it meant to the average citizen, because it's a very technical issue. But how would you explain it?
Yeah, so regional plan was fairly unique. It was one of the first time in India where we used the 73rd, 74th Amendment, which is go to the people, so allow the panchayat level, the municipal level, to actually make the decision of what the future is. So being the first time, it was experimental in that sense, because people didn't understand mapping, people didn't understand the whole thing of development densities, of what infrastructure is, and therefore one had to educate them. So when we prepared the regional plan, we just created a framework plan and sent it to the villages to say, now based on your projected population, based on your ends, what land you see would be. So of course, in the framework that we put, we said you cannot touch forest, you cannot touch fields, you cannot touch water bodies, you cannot, so this is the framework that you work. So you work only, say, with the orchard areas where you can in settlement. So there's some villages like areas from their proposed.
I think we are having a small glitch with the voice, but Keeping fingers crossed and hoping it comes back, because Dean is saying Dean is making a very interesting point here, basically about the regional plan. Dean, hello. Just give us a minute to iron this out. Yeah, carry on, Dean. So you were saying Benauli was overprotective. That was the last we heard.
Overprotective of development. So therefore, they started removing all the settlement areas. I mean, a lot of the settlement areas from existing settlement areas. We don't need this sort of area there because people haven't built on it as yet. And whereas in Morji, they wanted more and more settlement areas, and they want to convert fields and forests as well into settlement areas. So, and they had no idea of scale. You know, they say playground, you know, or little, and the playground would the children's playground would be like, you know, the size of 10 football fields, you know, because they have no idea of how much, you know, what the scale of the maps that we're actually looking at. So therefore, it's a learning experience, and I'm glad it happened, because at least now people are aware. People can read maps. You know, all this data is accessible to them. And so when we prepared the plan, we said all this must go out in the public domain. Therefore, it has to be put on the net. It has to be put on, you know, where people can actually see it and understand the thing. Because power comes from actually knowledge of, you know, what is planned for the future, what the policy. So if you put that power on the people, then I'm quite sure they will monitor what's happening. They will you know, make sure that planners are on check, politicians are on check, you know, legislators are on check. So I think it's important that there's a capacity building exercise that takes place at the Panchayat level, and organizations like GIPAD, which is a good organization, can actually sort of look at these areas and in creating capacity at the Panchayat level.
But then it was not implemented, no? The regional plan, in the sense that
no, regional plan was eventually implemented. So it was when it first came out, it was actually put on hold. But the basic principles of reducing FAR in villages, of, you know, protecting eco zones, were immediately implemented. Okay. Then the other sort of constraints of the regional plan in terms of the new settlement areas or removing other areas from eco-sensitive zones took a couple of years. But now the regional plan is actually in toto. But it's being subverted by the ODPs and 16B, which of course is now in court. And
16B, tell us about 16B, Dean. 16B.
So 16B is basically, they say that any person can just randomly apply to the town planning department and ask for his land to be converted. So you can convert fields, forests, anything that you want. And now so some 8,000 applications have come in, and which the town planning has said it's fine. And you see how ridiculously they've actually said okay to things which are completely, you know, bizarre, in, you know, just earmarked as, you know, really high eco-sensitive areas. And so you can see a complete non-application of mind, and it's only about money. And whereas a planning system is for the greater good of the population, it cannot be based on individual application. It is for public good, any planning process. And therefore 16B is one of the most ridiculous sort of modifications to the Town Planning Act that they're trying to push through.
Last question. I know you're busy. I don't want to stress you and add to your burden. But last question, what's your advice to the citizen in this kind of situation where politicians don't seem to have any responsibilities on themselves, regardless of party? They'll do pretty much what they want. They'll jump to wherever they want. What can the citizen do to actually mitigate this kind of situation?
So I think vigilance. I mean, in the Panchayat Act, there's actually a development committee which empowers the people. So there's a ward member and you know, other people in the village can actually join the development committee. So it's to make sure that you get people who are concerned about the village, get on that development committee or influence the development committee to make sure that their villages are protected. Make sure that you know, proposals that go to the Panchayat are monitored. They are aware of any building proposals or develop infrastructure, government infrastructure proposals that go to their village. So if you look at, say, what's happened in Morley, for example, they tried to bypass the Panchayat, but at least there people were aware and they spoke out, and they're trying to block those 3 linear projects. So if people really aware about development in their own village, I'm quite sure they can actually take action. It's difficult for anyone to monitor the whole of Goa, and therefore at local level, at ward level, if you can actually get involved in what's happening in a village, understand the permissions that are implemented in it. It doesn't mean you block everything that is proposed, but you look at things which are good for the village, the overall, wellness of society in that particular area. And I'm quite sure we can make a big difference. And then politicians at the end of the day want votes, So if they see something good coming up and, the credit goes to them, that's fine. So it's a question of making sure that this development is good and the vigilance of the general population. That's all I really think people should do.
That's a fascinating suggestion, but I said last question, but since you said 3 linear projects, I cannot let you go without asking for a Deanish explanation of 3 linear projects in a way that we, the common man, understand the implications of it.
Yeah, so in Mole, people must have heard about the 3 linear projects that are actually passing through the Mole forest, which is basically the road, a power line, and a railway line. Now, this is through one of the most eco-sensitive areas, in the world, actually, because Mole is part of the Western Ghats, which is one of the 10 biodiverse hotspots in the world. And the moment you have 3 projects which are, cutting through the thing, you're disconnecting the forest areas, and nature lies on continuity. So if you parcel forest areas, cutting off animals from one zone to another, you're going to stop the biodiversity area. You're actually going to start killing nature in a way. It's not just the forest; it's the beast. It's the whole connect that we have in terms of the water that flows through. Let's say the mother area, the soil conditions that are there, erosion would take place in a lot of these areas where development takes place. And if you go to see, these 3 linear projects are not for greater good. The power, they say, is meant for actually iron smelting things. The railway extension line is meant to transport coal ore, and the roadways is also meant to transport coal. So it's for actually private purposes, not even for public good. It's for a few companies. And we're talking about alternative energy and everything, and at the same time we're talking coal, So it's completely subvertive what is happening, in the state of Goa. And it's important that people actually wake up to these so-called development issues and understand what it's all about, and make sure that they don't happen, and whatever development takes place is very sustainable and for the benefit of the local population.
Thanks a ton, Dean. I've learned so much in so few words. I'm really amazed, and I'm appreciating not only the beautiful houses which you built, but the citizen stands that you've been taking all along for all the years we know you. Thank you so much. Thank you for sparing your time in spite of your busy schedule. Thanks and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.